praying about. And here it says they were in great fear, great fear. And yet it says where no fear was. What is fear then? Number 2, faceless enemies. We don't even know them. They don't show up. But they're faceless enemies afflicting our reasoning faculty. Number 3, frequently expected adversity realized. Frequently expected adversity realized. That's fear. Look at Job chapter 3. In Job chapter 3, you've been wondering, how could that happen to Job? He attracted it by the fear that he had. Let's look at Job chapter 3, verse 25. It says, for the sin which I greatly feared is come upon me. And then he said, and that which I was afraid of is come unto me. Then he said in verse 26, I was not in safety, neither had I rest, neither was I quiet, yet trouble came. He said, he was rich, but he was not in safety. And he had all these children and a good wife, and he was not in security or safety. And he said he had been afraid every time. What does that mean? Every time he woke up, he said, I wonder whether these children will still remain alive by the time I get old. And they need to be taking care of me. And because of that fear and that fear and that fear, the fear, actually fear is a form of faith in the negative. As your faith attracts the fulfillment of the promises of God, so fear will attract all the causes and all the things you're afraid about. And that's why Job himself said, this chapter 3, something had happened in chapter 1. Something happened in chapter 2. As he sat back and he said, now I understand. This is not new. This is what I've been fearing all the time. And Job, why were you fearing that all the time? I think Satan had more information about Job than Job himself had. You know what Satan said? God, you have made a hedge around him. I cannot even penetrate. And I cannot destroy what he has. About his house, about his children, about his family, you have made a hedge around them. And Job never knew that. And he feared unnecessarily. And now when everything came, he now said, for the sin which I greatly feared is come upon me. And that which I was afraid of is come unto me. What's fear then? Frequently expected adversity, now realized. Number 4, fantasized exaggeration above reality. That's fear. There's a little idea, there's a little thought that comes to you. And then you start expanding it and building on it, and it's growing up, and it's all fantasy. And you fantasize that exaggeration above reality. And let's look at Numbers chapter 13. Numbers chapter 13. This is what people fear. And you think about what, Pentecostal churches are doing today, and the deliverance ministers, what they're doing. Many times we're just wasting precious time fighting enemies that are not there. And many times we're just praying and saying, instead of sit the person down and say, now, what are you afraid about? Let the fellow talk and let the fellow explain to you what is it he's afraid about or she's afraid about. And then after that explanation, then you will know whether what he needs is not prayer, but some explanation and teaching from the word of God, so that we'll know that this kind of fear, F-E-A-R, may just be fantasized exaggeration above reality. I want you to look at Numbers chapter 13. This kind of exaggeration above reality. We're looking at chapter 13 of Numbers, verse 33. And there we saw the giants, the sons of Anak, which come of the giants. And we were in our own sight as what? I think that's exaggeration. You've seen grasshoppers before. A grasshopper is not up to, my fist, very small, maybe like these 2 fingers. And then you'll see a whole man like a giant. And it says, we, the Israelites, how can you say that? We know that there have been slaves in Egypt. And we know that when somebody is doing manual work, his muscles are developed. And we know that these people didn't have any chariots, and they were walking from Egypt, and they were walking to the land of promise. These were strong people. And these were people that they have been developed physically, and yet they are now telling us that in comparison they are grasshoppers to those giants. That's what they looked in their sight. And then he said in that part of that verse 33, and so we were in their sight. Hey, how do you know that you were grasshoppers in their sight? I thought you were spies. They were spies that went into the land as spies. They didn't go to discuss with the people. They didn't listen to the people. They didn't know what the people were thinking about them. And they said, in their sight, we were like this. My friend, that's exaggeration. It's like, I cannot go to my place of work today. There is a lion in the way, and the lion will kill me. That's exaggeration. My boss is, is such a tyrant, is going to fire everybody. That's exaggeration. If he fires everybody, who is going to get the work done? The recession, we don't have anything to eat. That's exaggeration. How are people moving on the street if they have nothing to eat? We exaggerate too much. And then we're trying to fight this kind of fear, which is just fantasized exaggeration above reality. Look at verse 14. And all the congregation lifted their voice and cried, hey, why are you crying? Because of what they said. How do you know what they said is right? They didn't bring back any picture. There was no mobile phone, and there was no camera to bring back pictures and actually compare. How do you act on the information somebody has given you, and then you begin to cry? You know what people do to us, the things they tell us? And they say, we're like grasshoppers. And if these great men, representatives of each of the tribes, if they went to the land, and then they looked like grasshoppers, and all the people, the giants, they also looked at them as grasshoppers, why didn't they kill them before they came back? Why were they still alive? And by the way, they even cut the pomegranates and the fruit, and they carried on their shoulders. How did they give you a chance to cut all that down? Don't you reason? And then the people began to cry. And now they said, and the people wept that night. And all the children of Israel, how many of them? I said, how many of them? Do you see how wrong information can just set us on edge? Make us afraid unnecessarily, and then make us to follow another direction and just destroy our lives and destroy our destiny. And then it says all those children, they murmured against Aaron and against Moses. What's Moses' fault? And what's Aaron's fault? Do you see how we fight the wrong people? Because we're afraid. And then we criticize the wrong people because we're afraid. And then it says now, would God that we had what? Again? But we don't need to die. Even if you're afraid, all you should have said, would God will stay in this place where we are, and we don't go to the place. After all, the tribe of Reuben and Manasseh and Gad, they stayed on this other side. So, if you're afraid, you don't need to die. You can stay where you are and not go to where the giants are. Do you see, when people are afraid, they lose their reasoning faculty. They lose what we call common sense. And common sense becomes uncommon. And they cannot reason that this is what to do. That's the reason why when any fear strikes your heart, you know what you do? You stop and you reason through. You put everything down. And then you say, what am I afraid about? One, there are giants in the land. Then two, we look like grasshoppers. All right? If that's the problem we have, no fear. There's nothing to fear. Have we gone through this kind of experience before? With the children, with the people of Egypt, were we masters or were they equal? No. Those Egyptians too, they were like giants. How about Pharaoh? How about their chariots? And then the thousands of chariots that came when we were at the Red Sea. What happened to them? They perished and were still alive. Well, those giants, God will know how to deal with them. If you will reason through what you've gone through already, up till this stage, are you like 20 years of age now? You've seen trouble in this lifetime since you were born. Are you now 30 years of age? You've seen some challenges since you were born. And if you see a challenge now, instead of fearing the giants ahead of you, just sit down and say, Well, what giants am I fearing? One, I've not even seen them. Am I sure that these spies that are telling us this, am I sure they are right? Am I sure they are not exaggerating? Even if they are not exaggerating, I write it